Hi, I'm Michelle. I have wanted to address these comments about my looks for quite some time, but I have ADHD and I overthink it and I get overwhelmed and I feel like I can't get out what I need to say. First, thank you for the nice compliments. It's a nice switch from what I'm used to experiencing as a Native woman in Canada. I wanted to talk about this. Now, this just symbolizes to many people missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, but it's my life. This represents how vulnerable I am. This represents how vulnerable my child is. It represents how my mother was vulnerable, how my granny was, and it represents colonialism, something that Canada still doesn't want to acknowledge. It represents the ongoing genocide and land theft of Indigenous peoples on these lands. And Canadians know damn well, and you're seeing that with the conversation about buy Canada, buy Canadian made, because we all know Donald Trump is basically trying to absorb Canada, which is just a form of colonialism. Um, I'm not as worried about that as I know many people are. And the reason why is because if there's one thing colonizers have, it's their laws. So the US has their safeguards, Canada has our safeguards. Canada's part of the Commonwealth, which means that we are part of Britain. That's why I laugh when I hear Canadians talk about sovereignty, because they're not recognizing their treaty partnership and more. This particular piece was gifted to me from a young Two-Spirit, a person who doesn't identify the same as the straight cis that we're all supposed to. And the queer community rejects them out of sole racism and colonialism. And I can always tell when people haven't read this because of the way they speak to me. This is Reclaiming Power in Place, the final report into the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. All of this is so important when complimenting an Indigenous woman because we have a history of decades of dehumanization, sexualization of Indigenous women, the assumption we're somehow for sale, because that's how Canada has treated us and Britain has treated us for over 150 years, 400 really. In this report, it actually talks about understanding colonization as a structure, early European explorations among First Nations and the impact on gender relations as Indigenous women were the leaders and are the leaders for that matter. Media representation and history. In January we had Sites of Truth. This is a public report for all Canadians to talk about the missing children and unmarked graves. But as proud as you see Canadians making apps about, made in Canada, you don't see them proudly talk about reconciliation and action towards the 94 calls to action. And they're not talking about the 231 calls to justice in this national inquiry. When I see queer community members and organizations not acknowledge the 231 calls to justice, I know they're still coming from a place of racism and pro-colonialism. This is where I'm at when somebody tries to do something nice like compliment my hair. It is a Western Eurocentric value to value these things. And as a person who was raised in a racist town, in a racist country, I personally really struggled with my indigeneity and what was pretty. When I was in grade 3, I went to a sleepover and I was voted the most likely to be a sex worker. So yesterday, when somebody was talking about a hooker, that's a stigmatizing language that I would never tolerate because in this colonial capitalist system, Indigenous women are at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Two-Spirit are even further below that. Because we aren't meant to be the people that are taken care of. On TikTok, Canadian influencers, content creators make zero money. And every Canadian knows that. But they don't promote my things. In fact, most of the white Canadian content creators steal my words and never credit me. And that's what I face every single day. And as somebody who's just unpacking ADHD and autism, understanding, I come in good faith, but most people don't. And of course, I speak sarcasm, and I've had to. It's a survival skill. But at the end of the day, a lot of people don't mean nice things to me when they say nice things. And I really have a hard time trusting anyone as a result. So when people think that it's okay to, say nice things to Indigenous people, I'm old enough now, I don't believe that. Now I'm 48, and I give free education to basically everyone in my life because I'm forced to. Because people will say what seems like normal, which merely means colonizing ways of being, to me, and I'll somewhat address them. And it's usually taken very resentfully, as shown recently in my car accident when we went to mediation and my doctors wrote horrendous things in their notes about me, costing me tens of thousands of dollars, painting me in an evil, negative way. So even when I show up to the doctor's office looking like this, I'm still seen as an angry, ugly Native woman squaw. They didn't have to say squaw, but they certainly labeled me as obese. They labeled me as mentally unsound, etc. Because I talk like this all the time. And that's why a simple compliment about hair is so difficult to just take in good faith. Because I'm expected to conform to Western Eurocentric ways of beauty. And if people had read this inquiry, they would know why that might be a touchy subject. Why, even though I may present myself as best as I can in a so-called professional office, it's perceived as violent to them because they're used to colonialism working in their favor and not used to a Native woman maintaining her space and correcting people on whether it's journaling. Don't you journal? The assumption that Western Eurocentric standards of medicine somehow work for me when they've failed me at the age of 48, still unpacking whether or not I have autism and just got diagnosed with ADHD. Most white men, they get these diagnoses way early. And you see them as very prominent, influential influencers on the TikTok. Whereas as a Canadian TikToker, I don't get paid at all. And I certainly don't get the donations despite me having links in my bio, etc., for folks to be able to do that. So while asking me about my hair may seem innocuous, what it says to me is that you haven't read the dehumanization, sexualization of Indigenous women, which is clear through both the Truth and Reconciliation Commission 94 Calls to Action, as well as Reclaiming Power in Place, the National Inquiry. So I'm not saying I speak for all Natives, but I'm speaking for me. I struggle with any sort of compliment because this world has told me the opposite every step of the way. Even if I've won awards, even if I've ran for public office, not in the eyes of so many. They'll just paint me in the worst way they can to suit their agenda. So I appreciate the compliment, and I would say it may seem like trivial to you, but generations of my people's hair was cut. I had that straight, beautiful hair for most of my life. But then now that I've gone gray, it's curly. And now that I'm unpacking ADHD and autism, I need to be able to, be able to touch my hair and not have it in such tight braids and be able to release some of the stress that I, feel throughout my body. These are things I am unlearning and unpacking. So I hope if you've made it this far, thank you. And I hope you consider marching with your local Indigenous group on Valentine's Day instead of doing these stupid colonial capitalist dinners and such that mean nothing, because really you should be showing your love all the time. And we have to show our love to our lost ones, our loved ones, because this world is not kind to us. Come join us. There's usually a group marching or having a vigil somewhere in each community across this country. And if you don't know and you're not a part of that, be a better treaty partner. Learn who your neighbors are. Support their events. Financially support your local Indigenous elders and community the best you can by going to their markets and such as well. People claim they're proud to be Canadian, but I don't see the orange heart alongside the Canadian flag and all the social media proud Canadians showing me how little they really think about their treaty partnership with the original peoples of these lands. So thank you for following me, for listening and making it this far. And again, consider donations to people that you learn from instead of just exploiting them.